Okay, keep going.
So I was on this Uber
I'll
drive.
take.
She said, "Well, what do you do for a living?" "Well, how deep do you want to go?" That was my response. And she said, "Well, you can't go too deep too fast, or else you'll get the bends." And it was such a powerful teaching for me in that moment because there's a part of me that, had a credential of I'm super deep dude, I'll go
Yeah,
as deep as you want to go. It's kind of like spiritual ambition,
totally.
transferring that ambition from the outside to the inside.
Yeah.
And I found that, like if I go too deep too fast and people get lost or they can't follow and they lose attention or they start to feel stupid or they start to feel insecure that they can't follow and they leave, what's the point?
Welcome to The Smoke Trail, hosted by Smoke Wallen. Join Smoke on a unique journey of awakening consciousness, sharing authentic stories and deep discussions with inspiring guests. Explore spirituality, leadership, and transformation, tools to elevate your path.
Welcome to the Smoke Trail. This is really exciting for me. You're kind of the impetus for moving forward with this. This kind of ended up being in this bucket of, well, I'm not really sure. So it's just going to kind of float out there for a while. I invited you to be a guest to have a conversation around consciousness and spirituality and leadership. And then you came back to me and said, when are we doing this? And so that helped spur me to action. So thank you.
You're welcome.
My intention with the Smoke Trail podcast is to explore deeply things that are important to me, things that I think are maybe important to others, along the lines of spirituality, leadership, and all the things are related to that, which include trauma, healing from trauma, what higher power, just all those topics, and do it in a way that's respectful, but we're not afraid of really any topic, and hopefully it's conversations that go deeper than surface level stuff. There's plenty of that out there, so to share deeply along these topics, ideas, and experiences I have had, my guests have had, and hopefully along the way that will help or inspire others who are on the path in some way, shape, or form. And Michael, do you want to add anything intention wise to what I have said?
Sure. I'd say my intention always, and especially in the context where there's opportunity for people to witness or be served, or there's an intention for service, is to be available to the moment and to get out of any preconceived ideas or expectations of what is supposed to happen and to really allow the alchemy of both of our souls coming together and both of our sincerity coming together to really say what needs to be heard by someone out there, hopefully that creates a pivot or a 1 degree shift that helps them open their hearts and connect more to who they really are.
Awesome. Thank you. That is the spirit of this. I think you and I have had some really, I think for me, deep conversations over the last more than a year now since we got introduced by our mutual friend, and those have been great. And honestly, I wish some of those had been recorded because I think they could have been useful, to share with some people. I'm here in Sedona. You are, I know you're in the mountains somewhere,
Idlewild,
undisclosed location.
Idlewild, California.
Nice, cool. All right. Well, glad to have you. A short introduction, which other information, website, and everything in our notes. Dr. Michael Brabant is a seasoned specialist in fostering psychologically safe environments that lead to authentic and lasting transformation within CEOs, leaders, and organizations. I really love that you bring this kind of understanding of the academic world's true psychology, clinical work, the work you've done with in that side of things to the spirituality side, and you bring it together in companies and organizations, with leaders, and that is very much aligned with what I'm interested in and what I'm trying to bring together. So it's a natural fit in my view.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I'd like to ask and just kind of start our conversation going is, I'd like to just kind of go back, and I mean, you shared some really deep stuff. I thank you. Not unlike me, but very different for different reasons. A questioning of, is there more, kind of thing. And I know that I had that too, but in a different way. But I don't know if you could comment on that or give us a little share of some of that perspective that you started with.
Sure. As you were asking the question, the quotation from Krishnamurti, came up for me, who, when I first heard this quotation, I was just like, wow, this feels like it nutshells my experience. He said, "It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society." And for me, I think any sort of uh, searching for something more than conventionality in one's life really comes when the existing operating system, the existing belief system doesn't work on the inside. And I think in the context of business, that existing operating system of achievement and results orientation and outcomes, execution, it works on the outside. But what works on the outside doesn't work on the inside. I can't execute towards inner peace. I might engage in things that bring more of that, but I can't use that same hypermasculine, linear, logical approach to my interiority and expect to have the same results. So for me, I didn't have any contrasting experience or guide or leadership other than conventionality. So as a kid, I was trying to adjust as a very different, hypersensitive soul to this conventional world that never made sense to me. But because I didn't have anybody showing me a different way, that was the only option. It was just option A, option A, option A, even though my being was like option Z. So I remember being 5 years old in kindergarten, looking around, being like, what are these kids talking about? Like, what are we doing here? And then of course the weird stuff that happened at home with my parents, which I believe all of us have experienced some weird stuff at home with our parents because of the intergenerational trauma and just the lack of psychological aptitude that is prevalent to raise children in a good way that connects them to their soul. Of course, there's more now these days, which I'm really grateful for. But that all that stuff, it was never this is weird or this is off or this is feels like friction to me. It was like this is the way my intuition, my feeling, my authenticity must be wrong. And I think having so much of that self-negation compounded over time just led to a breaking point. For me, it was earlier than most, I would say, but it just led to a place where it's just like I can't do this. And that's where I wrote in the question, like there was a time where I was just like I cannot live this way. There has to be another way or I'm over it. And we could call that, yes, it was depression. It was labeled that. I got medication for major depressive disorder. But for me, depression is a lack of expression. So I didn't have a venue or an avenue or safety to express what was true for me. So my truth depressed me. All that accumulation weighed me down. And I think that that's the case for most people. When they're doing something that's not aligned with their soul, there's going to come a point where it doesn't work anymore. And we can label that all sorts of mental disorders, but essentially that's the mechanism that I see.
That really resonates with me. The inconsistency or incongruence between what we feel inside and know to be right, or just have this sense of like, this is not what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing. I can relate very well to that. And as a young child, now I have these memories that have come back, and I'm like, there's something wrong with everything in my world, and I knew it. And it doesn't matter, what the story is, frankly, at this point. But there was just fundamental things where the adults in my world were incongruous with integrity, with truth, with how any child should be treated. And it's not a woe is me thing. It's just that I knew that it was off. I knew it was like, whoa, something's completely wrong here. For me, it turned into like this hyper independence streak of I have to break away and I have to do it on my own. And it was very much it formed a lot of what my ego, became, is, going from this horrible, frightening, threatening situation with incongruousness around me to, okay, if I excel in the world, whether it be in sports or in something in school, or, I can escape that world that I came from. And but I can only do it by like beating everyone else. Like it was a competitive thing that got like somehow like that. That's how I translated it internally. It served me well in many ways, in my career as an entrepreneur and doing lots of things, but it didn't serve me in other ways because it was so much of an ego mind centric kind of positioning where I couldn't trust anyone out there. So the only one I could trust was myself, but I really didn't trust myself either.
Yeah, it's a tricky paradox, and I think that I really appreciate the intention of this podcast to go deep and to go nuance. And I also want to really like thread the depth with the application, throughout our conversation so that it's really relevant. Because I think there might see knowing your story and knowing that you're a pioneer in a lot of your circles, and I certainly feel that way in my circles, um, to kind of weave it back to the practical as well. And I know you're probably going to do this anyways, but I just felt the impulse for that. And I think that there's something about I mentioned in the Q&A beforehand that'll be in the notes around, like you said, what's the shadow that you're working with right now? And I said control. And I also said that the shadows that I'm working with, I feel that we're all working with consciously or subconsciously. And my experience is that when I'm a little person and I have these adults around me that are incongruent with their words and actions, or what's actually in integrity and what they're doing, I don't think, wow, my mom or dad's messed up here. I think I'm messed up, I'm wrong, I'm being treated this way because I'm bad, and I'm abused in that, and I go into shame for that, and I'm out of control. So as soon as I get out of that fixed hierarchy of big person, little person, I notice in myself and in others, people that have ambition and people that are achievement oriented, it's all about reestablishing control. How do I was out of control, so I'm going to get in control through winning, and I'm going to get in control through accumulation of resources and accumulation of external validation. But the issue that I find oftentimes when I'm working with CEOs is that even though if somebody has a good heart, if they're still motivated from this, I got to be in control and I have to be right, even subconsciously, the words they're saying don't match up with their energy. They might have like, I want to create this really inclusive environment, but unconsciously they're like, I need to win and I need to be right. And what I find is that incongruency, however subtle compared to the things that we're talking about from our parents in childhood, evokes that same lack of safety in other people from their childhood when the big people were incongruent with their words and actions. And so it's a really high standard, I think, that you and I hold for what integrity and congruence really looks like. But good leadership and generally out there isn't that deep integrity between words, action, and energy, but it's still effective in getting results. It's just not effective in cultivating consciousness in people and cultures.
I love that, and there's no chance that we're not going to get to practical. And I think this is really a great aspect of it. The idea that you can go say something, but it not really be everything all the way down to your vibration. It was kind of foreign to me, honestly. Like I didn't understand what you just said. I wouldn't have understood what you just said 5 years ago. Now, kind of at one level, I would, right? Okay, well, you got to be consistent. But at another level, like the fact that the energetic signature that we put out is what is true, no matter what we say. I didn't understand that. Like I didn't understand like the vibration is real. And so we can, if we aren't consistent with our internal core values and kind of what's driving, what's our motivation, what's our intentions, and what we're saying externally in any situation, whether it's a conversation or it's leading a group or company, it doesn't matter what you say, people are going to pick up on it at some level, some more directly than others, but everybody at some energetic level knows if if what you're saying is integrous with what you mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I found too for myself, you were asking questions around mentorship and how do you receive guidance from others. And I've come to learn, and it's been so humbling, because I was given a pretty good CPU above my shoulders, and I can be successful in a lot of ways in academics and in business and so forth. But what was so humbling for me is that I could be checking all the things and all the metrics of am I in alignment here that I could see with my mind and my perception, and I could still be missing things. I could be sincere, I could be willing, I could be checking off all the boxes and still miss things. And what I find is that when someone's charismatic and intelligent and carries influence, it's scary to give them feedback. It's scary for people sometimes to give me feedback, or I've seen other people give me, oh no, I'm open for feedback. But it's like, yeah, but is there actually a space where somebody can fumble their way into something that they sense that's off, that they might not have clarity intellectually to name and pin down? And does my field welcome that? And do I reward that as a leader when somebody takes the risk, even if it's imperfect? Or does my unconscious defenses be like, well, I hear what you're saying, but actually I'm going to counter it with this, that, and the other because it's not totally, meets my standards.
Well, that's great. Like, we lived it, right? So I invited you to give me input onto one of my first talks where I shared kind of a little bit of my journey and some of the trauma and kind of what I'm learning. I shared that with you. I think I did a good job. I felt pretty good about it, but I wanted feedback. And then you gave me feedback, which was at a level that no one else had given, which, thank you. And then I did, then in preparation, and some of the feedback was like, did that feel very good? It was like, like I thought I did better than what I think I heard, but I understood it. I sat with it a little bit. My instinct was to counter, like, yeah, but, exactly what you're saying. And then fast forward, I gave the YPO talks in Miami and then Istanbul, and I shared those with you after the fact, which I did take in a lot of what you said and redid it, but it was still a canned TED-like talk on stage because so it was planned and organized. And you gave me some other feedback around that, and I found myself, just wanting your feedback, but also resisting a bit. And
Mm,
you even called it out at one of our conversations, and not in a bad way, just like, hey, I'm sensing that you asked for this, I gave you this, but did you really want it? Yeah, so I can relate and lived experience, and that's it's not easy.
mm,
One of the hardest things as a leader in a position of leadership, big organization, small organization, whatever, doesn't matter, is you have to be the person who's like setting the example that the reality is you're just a human also. Now you're in that position for a reason, possibly, and or for sure, but there's lots of ways to get there. But it doesn't mean that people around you don't have tremendous things to give you, but you've got to be able to receive it, and they have to feel that. And that's not easy to pull off, is it?
no. Well, and it's so interesting. I was talking to a CEO client of mine yesterday, and she is writing a book that I think is going to make a big positive ripple in her industry. And she's at the final stages of it. And she said to her team, she's like, she was presenting the cover to her team, the visual cover. And she's like, I really wanted to go in there and get feedback and to make the cover better so that it matches the best possible medium to express and have influence in the industry and for her own company. And then she's like, but when I started getting the feedback, she's like, I didn't like it. Like a part of me wanted them to be like, that's amazing, go for it, go to
Yeah.
press. And then she didn't, she masked the insecurity and received the feedback and did the thing and took it on the chin, so to speak. And then she said to me, she's like, well, Michael, how do I receive feedback and share what's vulnerable without them having trust being broken, that I'm overly emotional and not able to take feedback? And it's so interesting, this sort of black and white thinking that I see a lot of leaders have. If I'm honest, then I'm going to lose rapport and trust. and they're not gonna believe my certainty and ability to influence or to ability to lead. And for me, we had said, I don't know if you had said it in the intro or we said it before you started recording, of like, it's powerful for people to see someone embody a vulnerability with full self-acceptance. Yes, I have these shadows. I mean, you just modeled it beautifully. I did that defensive thing that you just talked about in real time,
Yeah.
and it's like I can be defensive and not weak. If I'm self-accepting as I name the parts of me that have defensiveness or insecurity, but I'm strong in my naming of them, all of a sudden I'm respected more because I'm being real. And at the same time, everybody who's witnessing me on my team all of a sudden is like, oh, that gives me permission to be vulnerable too. I don't have to be perfect.
It's so true. And it's one of the hardest things I have found is that because you're my I'll speak from the firsthand. My ego mind, my identity that I was wrapped up in for most of my life, it was protecting something. So, it was protecting this young child back then, but it had grown powerful. And and that's I've unwound it over the last few years and through a lot of experiences and a lot of work, a lot of integration, a lot of lots and lots of activities. I am I guess the 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 prototype for multiple techniques layered on. I don't know what you would call it. Scott Adams, the Dilbert creator, has a book that he talks about talent stacks, and I really like his thought process of like if you get skills in different areas and you layer them on, all of a sudden you're in the top 1%, even though in any one of those you might not be. I think in regard to this journey, like I've been doing like the talent stack thing where I've tried a lot of different things. The Course of Miracles, the reading everything under the sun, meditating deeply, plant medicine, integrative coaches, a whole bunch of therapeutic approaches. So a lot of different approaches. And along the way, I've unwrapped this ego mind that is super protecting that inner self. And so, but even with that work, Michael, like I still find myself catching, oh, that's perky. That like I playfully call my ego. I just named it at some point. Like it's Perky. Perky showed up, and Perky's really actually my friend. But Perky, the version of Smoke, would basically say, if you criticize me, said something against me, I would say, screw you, Michael. I'm not defensive. Like that's the energy of it, right? Like it's like counterpunch, like immediately. Like how do I come back? So that's that thing. It's still part of me. It's still although I've peeled it away, I've put my conscious awareness on it so much that I recognize it, but it didn't destroy it. It's like it's still, I'm human. You can do a lot of work and you can still catch yourself being snagged by these things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the snag, when the snags are integrated, it dimensionalizes the soul. And what I mean, I'll kind of say more what I mean by that, but like essentially, I hear oftentimes ego is spoken in leadership development as a monolithic construct. It's either I'm not an ego or I'm an ego. And for me, every time I have not been fully present with my experience and I've reacted in some way, or I've been in a situation that's been unsafe relationally, we can say a snag gets accumulated, a nodule on the conditioned self gets accumulated. And the 5-year-old that was yelled at by his dad for no reason because his dad was just in a rage and he didn't deserve being yelled at needs a different thing than the 13-year-old that got made fun of at school, or the 22-year-old that felt incompetent when somebody asked him a question. So the snag that happens in the moment, for me, I find it's so important to like take the unitary construct or monolithic construct of ego and break it down into parts. So there's a part of me that's defensive. Is my 5-year-old defensive? Is my 7-year-old defensive? Is my 22-year-old defensive? Because I need to speak to that part very differently developmentally to be accurate to what
but
they need
it's
to
still a part of you,
soften.
right? It's still
It's still a
it's
part of
part.
me,
Yeah,
but they need something, they need specific medicine. And I find that most meditation traditions just speak, become aware of the thing that's not awareness. And sometimes some meditations say, well, just label it. I'm thinking or I'm judging. And for me, it's almost like if there's a 5-year-old part of me that needs love because nobody gave it to him and it shows up as defensiveness, and it comes out and it's basically a 5-year-old saying, hey, Michael, I need some love. And I just look at it and I point to it and I say, thinking, it's not going to get its love, you know? And
right.
so, but if I can be in that place, then all of a sudden he softens and then my energy field becomes safe enough to the 5-year-olds and everybody,
Yeah,
where it's a cellular transmission of safety that's before any words or any conduct or any flow chart of high conscious values. And so that kind of specific detail work I find is so necessary after the meta disidentification with that's not my real self, that's my ego. Okay, what aspect of ego is that? And it feels like an important nuance that's necessary.
yeah, and it's really the context of these different layers of your ego, right? Like whether it's age or experiences that you had, and I think it's a level of depth, as you say, that it is probably not washed over, not even aware, not even discernible by much of like the corporate environment. And so, we're talking in nuances here, but it really matters. And one of the things that I loved about your discussion was, at one point you had this strong desire to help others, right? So you wanted to go help others and do counseling, or you can say in your words, but you were on a kind of a mission to do that, and you were getting your doctorate, your graduate degree, and along the way, like, you realized internally, like, I'm not living up to what I'm trying to help other people do, and you took a step back. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because I think it ties into this a lot. It's about congruence. It's about, whatever we say means something if it's what we are, and it means something else if it's not.
Yeah. Well, awareness and vision is so much easier than embodiment and actuality. And I think we live in a society that preferences the mind and what is seen and what can be forecasted so much more than the journey that it takes to come into full integrity with that. And so I kind of get this image of like, there's the lowest common, as my partner says, the lowest common denominator part is sort of rooted in one location. And then the mind like can lean forward and see all these possibilities and all these visions of what could be. Um, but that looking and that seeing is so instantaneous. But the journey to get that lowest common denominator, most insecure, most whatever, that's not that, all the way forward to that vision takes time. And we live in such a fast-paced, need it now kind of situation. And if I can see it, that means that I am it. Or because I read 5 books on it, then I can exercise the tactics. And I think that there's a really just a misperception of what it really takes to be an embodied conscious leader. And I think also missing a humility of what it takes, the time that it takes, because a lot of times I see people that are later on in their careers, they're already really successful. They wake up to a certain different way of being. And then it's like, great, well, let me use all my skill sets of how I got here to embody these things that I'm learning over here. And there are stages of maturity of evolution, just as there are stages of maturity to business success. And so for me, it's really like that sensitivity that I had as a child that I'm continually reclaiming is just kind of like when I know when I feel something's off with myself or with a project, do I pause or do I power over? And I could have easily powered over and just like, oh, screw it. I had this intuition that I shouldn't be a psychologist, but I'm a year away. Like I spent all these hundreds of thousands of dollars. Let me just finish it and then I'll figure it out. rather
Yeah.
than like freak my parents out and freak out all these. What do you mean you're a year away from your doctorate and you're going to leave? You know, and I think that sensing of just knowing, okay, something's off. I don't need to quit everything. I don't need to stop. I just need to pause. And it's in that pause that that trajectory of my ego got interrupted. And then my soul could come in and be like, well, pivot here. And then if I can listen to that pivot, then I can go to so much greater heights that my ego could never even perceive in the first place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That we when we first started talking, and I was coming to this kind of what you described, a successful business entrepreneur, done a lot of companies, done tons of deals, now doing M&A, right? Like that's my public persona, business world. And then as I went through this awakening journey, I'm like, holy crap, like, oh, I didn't even think about all these other things. And I've gone deep, as you know, and spent a lot of time on it. And it's been like a really steep learning curve. And you introduced me to Susan Cook Greuter, maybe I'll say her name wrong, but who had this framework. And then I went down a rabbit hole learning all these things, and studying Hawkins. Was I think I brought to you, but other lots of different traditions. And then I was kind of like putting my thoughts about, like, there's different stages of development along different, like, aspects of ourselves, whether it's like you said, the mind can be cognitively could be really, really advanced and really successful. I might be I got really good at being out there doing Q&A, talking to people, being in the press, all that kind of front facing stuff. I could raise capital like nobody. I could do all these things, so I was really developed in certain skill sets. And then others, I realized, like, I was really, really undeveloped. And so it's not I think what you said and what I'm saying in a different way is, it's not one dimensional. Humans are not one dimensional. We're multi-dimensional. And you could have great ability and cognitive IQ. You could have great ability but not have an emotional sensor where you can actually understand what you're saying is doing and meaning to people. You could have incredible brilliance in music or in math or in some kind of art, and have other areas where you're not good at writing. And I think all those things are developmental lines. I think Ken Wilber does a nice job of kind of bringing some of this stuff together, and really kind of calling out, like, we have these different quadrants, we have these different lines of development, and they all impact how we perceive whatever we're experiencing. And when it comes to kind of like this true self, depending on where we are with these other developments, we're going to see the same set of circumstances differently.
Yeah, totally. Well, to bring in a little bit more, I mean, you're talking about multiple intelligence that was popularized by Howard Gardner out of Harvard, and he kind of brought those kind of spatial and musical and cognitive and emotional. And then Suzanne Cook-Reuter and Ken Wilber's work sort of synthesizes all these different things. So he talks about
Yeah.
developmental lines and developmental levels. And these developmental lines, we have different capacities in each capacity. And it's dangerous, if you have a really high IQ and a really low moral development, that's a really dangerous combination. But then there's this meta sense of what level of consciousness am I operating from? And for me, I think of level of consciousness almost like an OS of the self, like the operating system of the self, because I could have a really high IQ and I could really have this pattern recognition. I could, like you said, be very adept in terms of influencing people, but from you've always been a heart-centered guy, influencing people from a place of what you believe in. And you're not, you've always, you don't have a low moral development. You've had a high moral development as well. And I think the thing is about the levels of consciousness, it's for me, it's like, what's the value set that I have to utilize all of my gifts and abilities? Is it for my personal gain? Is it for the service of others? Or is it from some bigger cosmic purpose? Because as I increase my operating system, I have the same IQ. My value system is just expanded. My ability to take perspectives is expanded. So, from what I know of you and our friendship, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're using all your gifts now in order to listen to a higher calling of your soul and of the world to support in a way that you don't even necessarily know beforehand, but it's like in the moment being guided from place to person to be the vehicle of service that the world is asking for, not that you think it needs. And to have that level of surrender, that level of deconstruction of the ego being the ones driving those gifts requires maturation. That's not who you were when you were raising all that capital and doing all those TV interviews and all those kind of things. And so there's something about having a conversation. I think this is why those levels of consciousness are so important, because I could talk to a CEO who's brilliant and successful and they could get it, but they're still going to be operating from their center of gravity value set. And the irony that I find is that I can't evolve because I think evolution is a better thing than staying in stasis. I evolve because I consolidate the earlier levels of development that we could call shadow. If I consolidate the unmet needs of my earlier stages of my earlier life and I stop compensating, then all of a sudden I start to flower in my consciousness. It's not an ambition, it's actually a bring more health to the roots, and then the fruits become more healthy.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what we learned in the competitive, in business world of like, hey, how do I win? Right. It's like,
Right.
and set a goal and I have a clear vision and I back into here are the things I need to do to achieve that vision. And then I start doing those things and I get there. Now it's really, how do I put the light of conscious awareness on the shadows, on the things that I have buried, that I have skipped over, that I have compartmentalized, which that was for me, I could compartmentalize everything. It was perfect. It was like I could put it in a box, put it close it up, and I could just do my thing, and it could be the world is falling apart, but I could ignore it. And how do I open those locks and deal with them in the sense of like becoming aware of them? What I learned on the way is just the idea of doing that is much worse than doing it. And as I did it, as I went through this process of putting my awareness onto each and every shadow I could find, I'd never rule out I can find more, because like, every time I did, I'd find something else. So, it's an ongoing process. But as I have done this, moment of doing it is kind of intense energy, a feeling of dread or fear or anger or something. But if I sit with it, that's just energy and it flows. And as it dissipates, and sometimes it's faster than others, but it always dissipates. And then once you know that, it's like, oh, I can look at that. I can look at this. I can look at that. Yeah, it may bring up something I don't like, but then if I sit with it, it will dissipate. And all of a sudden you aren't stuck with this stuff inside of you. It's just flowing through you. And, we talked about snags, like as we go through our day, it's really, for me, it's become quite easy to go into a deep meditation in silence and get to that place and get to, the cloud of unknowingness, the ground of my soul, as Meister Eckhart would say, touching the Godhead. Like I get there really fast now. And it's like, okay. And I'm like, all thoughts will pop up, but it's like, I don't energize them, but just I'm there. But then me out in doing my day-to-day business, and I've got meetings and I've got a conference I got to go to. I'm leading a big family office group in a couple of weeks in Santa Monica, and I'll be in front, 200 people there, and it's business, and I'm going to be like, it's how do I keep that perspective in my work environment too? And I know it kind of bleeds over, but I'd love to just get some, conversation or thoughts around that and how you think about that, because it's become much easier for me to do it in strictly in meditation. And where I find I have continued to have work to do is how do I stay there, at least a part of me, while I'm engaging and out there in the world doing stuff.
Yeah, that's a great question. And There's a big difference between a state of consciousness and then a trait of consciousness. And a state of consciousness can be accessed instantaneously, whether it's meditation or plant medicine or the grace of a higher power coming and giving you a download. But to live it is so different. And I think the other thing that plays into this is the porosity of mind. All of us have porous minds, some more than others. And we can all feel that if we go into a certain group of people that are angry, we can feel the anger. If we go into a certain part of town that feels a little bit shady, we can feel the fear around us. It's not just our own fear, it's the energy of the space. And I'm sure anybody who's traveled abroad, the feeling going in a certain country is very different than the United States. And it's just like, wow, it's not just the aesthetics, it's not just the language difference. There's a different vibe here. And so if I'm coming from a mystical perspective, more focused on the interior and that space of presence, and then I'm in an environment, in your case, as the example of family office, where there's a lot of resources flowing, there's a lot of outward movement. How do we apply these resources? How do we do good in the world? Where do we make our investments? If that's the predominant energy in the space, you walk into that and you have inputs for that kind of thinking, those inputs are going to be like zing, they're going to be activated. And so it's like for me, what I find is like when people say, oh, I just went to Costa Rica and I did, a week of ayahuasca ceremonies and I'm just so lit. And I'm like, okay, well, talk to me in 3 months, because it's like, it's really about how do you take that glimpse and bring that light, like you said, internally to all the places that are dark. Because it's not just what you said. You said, oh, the energy arises from a snag or a memory or an emotion, and then it dissipates. And I would say it dissipates, but it also changes you. It changes the structure of your psyche and consciousness by being present with the things that normally have been compartmentalized. And that constant willingness to be with the uncomfortable and be changed helps that stabilization from the state or the glimpse into the trait. And I think that there's also the for me there's so much like I find that one of the biggest impediments to someone stabilizing their awareness or someone coming from their truth, especially leaders, is the lack of the ability to identify their core needs. And the core needs around, like, you could wake up in your hotel room and have an 8 a.m. meeting and not have time for meditation and still bring your presence and still bring your integrity and all those things. But if you had the first meeting at 10 a.m. and you were able to practice for 2 hours, and then you were able to take a break by yourself in your room to decompress instead of having lunch meetings and then going to an afternoon session, that would be more conducive environment to you coming back and resetting your awareness. And I think people don't really think about that. Okay, I have this trip and I'm crossing 3 time zones, and the next morning I have some meetings. It's like to actually think about, I need a day or two or three or maybe a week to decompress so that I can bring my best self forward. So I think some of it is practice and some of it is really understanding what are my needs and how do I allocate my schedule in a way where I can be in the highest alignment with my energy.
That is so true. And I was thinking about, I was notorious for being the most I could pack more into a trip to any town than anyone else I knew. And it was like it became like a game. Like, how many people could I see? How quickly in this condensed period of time? And I'd be flying around and zipping around and be back to back to back. And I'd have, my assistant Jennifer at the time was like, she had to learn, like, how far it was. I had a bunch of, back in .com days, I raised a bunch of money for my startup, and I was meeting with Silicon Valley and in San Francisco, and I had press interviews, and it was, the craziness of the .com one era, right? So I was in the heart of that, and I remember, like, I had her book me all this stuff, and but she was from Indiana, and she didn't know that, like, it took 2 hours to get from Silicon Valley to the East Bay and over to San Francisco and then back to Silicon Valley. So we had a disaster trip, and I'm like, all right, you have to study the map. This is before Google. maps were available and everything. I'm like, you have to like chart this stuff out, figure out how long it's going to take us to get to places, so I can precisely use my time wisely. Now I realize that was a moment in time, and so I don't second guess it, but I realize now like how much better I am, to your point, if I have buffers, if I have downtime, if I am able to center myself, if I'm able to kind of go to that place. And even a short meditation of 5 minutes makes a big difference for me to kind of be back and centered, and I can now face the next thing. So building that in, I'm really conscious of it today. But I think it's something that a lot of hard charging A personality types who are typically, end up leading organizations. It's an ego mind thing, but it's almost like a macho thing. It's like, how much can I do that is like, people like, how does he do that? How does he do that? It's like unbelievable. And it's an incredible amount of energy that goes into the doing of it. And are you bringing your best self to each of those situations, or are you spreading yourself too thin to be aware of what's going on? When you're leading people, it's about people. And if I'm in such a hurry that I got to get to my next meeting and I got to tell you this and I got to do this, I'm on send the whole time. How do I even know if you, Michael, or you're on my team and you're trying to tell me something, but I'm so on send, I can't hear it?
Yeah, there isn't bandwidth, there isn't receptivity, and I think that there's also this piece around like best practices where people look, all right, well, who are the people that are successful in the way that I want to be successful? And what did they do? And let me do what they did. And let me do what all my competitors are doing so I can keep up. And I think that this goes back to the needs and the sensitivity and the slowness to not only center myself, but like, wow, there's a part of me that's just like so bitter that I haven't had a day off in 3 months and it's just pulling at my energy. And instead of being like, well, let me listen to that and take a day off and whatever. It's like, ah, no, screw it. I just have a few more meetings and I got a few more things and we're at this deadline. It's end of year and we got to meet our investors' expectations and all sorts of stuff. But if I can really hold my needs and my parts as sacred, they're actually the map. Like I could read Steve Jobs' autobiography and I could read these other people's autobiography and glean some wisdom. But ultimately, the ultimate wisdom for my soul is inside of me. And I can learn from the outside. And so building rapport with this interiority rather than hard driving and always on send, as you said, gives me information that's unconventional, that flies in the face of conventional wisdom and best practices, that is counterintuitive if I were to say it out loud. But it actually guides me to the place that I only could have been guided if I listened inside. And I think that's the big thing. And I think if when I talk to CEOs or when I talk to people who are really successful, the biggest gains that they've had weren't just hard driving. It were downloads in the shower. It was that
Yeah.
unconventional risk. It was that synchronistic meeting. It was all those things that were outside of their playbook that led to these pathways they couldn't have foreseen. We know that, but do we actually optimize for the context to enable that more readily? And I don't think that that's
And
usually the case.
that's actually part of my intention here, honestly, like to bring this out, because I would have been, I can just use my example just because I lived it, right? So I just know what it's like. And like, you're competitive and you're up, either you're rising in a company or you're running a business and you're competing with all these different people. Like you say, like everybody's doing these certain things. And there's a lot of pressure to keeping up with what's going on and what other people are doing. I think once you get to a point where it's not externally focused, it's internally focused. What are my needs? What are the needs that I need to make? It actually gives you the power to resist that stuff and
Yeah.
and do it in a way that holds space to just make better decisions and to align better with what you're trying to achieve. And it's like you achieve much more by doing less. It's almost like it's kind of like we go down a rabbit hole of like laws of attraction and everything else, but it's like holding the vibration of gratitude and wholeness, as opposed to constantly seeking. And that hyperactivity of many leaders, and I can speak from me, like was along the way, I can now see it through different contexts, different lens that I was always seeking. I was like, I'm going to raise more than anyone else. I was the largest private capital raise in Indiana history, for any technology company at the time I did it. I was the largest, so I was like, that wasn't internally driven. That was me I needed to be able to say that. I needed to be able to prove to the market that that was true. I needed to prove to, and I just have such a different lens now that I see can be really powerful and helpful to many leaders. I think that's what you help people get to in terms of, getting to a more centered place. It's not just mumbo jumbo. It's not just, hey, go meditate, you'll be fine. It's being intentional, but being really clear with the inside, like who is this person? And you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Now, what's the best thing and what can I receive today in my ongoings? And I'm a work in progress, but like that's my stance, as opposed to what it used to be, which would be I didn't realize it, but would be translated as send, because I have tons of energy and I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to make this happen. We're going to raise money. We're going to do this. We're going to be successful. And you're all going to, and it's contagious. People around me are like, oh yeah, let's do that. That part of that's kind of cool, but now like in a different way, being in a settled way, let's go achieve what matters. And that's hopefully more contagious, but it's to be determined.
It's to be determined for sure. Well, it's from it's a completely different value set. It's a completely different metric than external validation. And I think that's one of the reasons why people stay external, is because external validation is such an easier fruit to pick off the tree than internal validation. And I recently came into the understanding, as I was reading the word over and over again, that I've seen a million times, self-esteem. Self-esteem isn't a description of how somebody is. It's actually a verb. Am I esteeming myself, or am I seeking other esteem through external validation? And if I don't practice taking care of myself, if I don't practice validating myself, I'm going to unconsciously seek external validation from others through achievement and so forth. And it's going to be contagious and it's going to be addictive. But I can't gain self-esteem through external validation. So I'm going to need continuous external validation if I don't have a wellspring of self-esteem. And I think when it comes to more is more, one of my friends has this beautiful phraseology around scarcity and abundance. He says, scarcity is not the opposite of abundance. Consumption is. Consumption is the opposite of abundance, which says, I need more so that I can do more, or I can have more, or I can get more, as opposed to, I'm full. I feel full. So I come from fullness, or your words, wholeness, and I don't need to add something because there's a deficit. I come into contact with deals or opportunities because it's a fit. And if I'm coming from this place at the negotiation table where everybody's going to put their best foot forward, and I'm coming from need, I'm not going to listen to that still small voice that says, God, this looks really good on paper, but something smells. This does not feel right. And if I'm in the more is more consciousness, then I'd be like, great, looks great on paper, get the deal done. Not knowing what that's going to lead to down the line, and the headaches and all of the drama and the chaos that could come from a misaligned deal. And so I need to really be in that place of fullness at the negotiation table, at the opportunity level, any place where I'm making any major decisions. Because if I'm trying to use that decision or that deal to fill a hole in my own self-esteem that only I can fill, I'm going to create a lot of chaos for a lot of people in that one moment. And so I really appreciate that transition.
That resonates so much. And I won't get into the specifics of deals, but I will say that my Anitra and I were talking about this the other day, and that if you don't learn the lesson, the universe is going to keep bringing it back to you and probably amplifying it more and more in your face until you learn the lesson. So for me, it was exactly that experience, coming at the need to achieve, the need to wantedness to have success, part of it was my escape from back in the childhood days, but it had now blossomed into just this ego mind CEO who did have a big heart, but I was still coming at it from a place of need. And I had a series of deals where each one got bigger and bigger. Each one got more publicity and more high profile. Each more had bigger wins. On paper, I've said this before, but I've made and lost, anywhere from, 5 to $50 million on paper many times now, like a bunch of times, like more than I want to even examine. Doesn't matter anymore. But I've done that, and I did that kind of coming at these things from that need position as you're talking about, and because of I had a lot of other skills. I had great ability to be convincing and to so I was that cartoon guy that ran over the cliff that doesn't look down. You can keep running. I could do that. I could do that with a whole company. I could just, oh, you mean the whole world is falling apart? No, not us. And I could just keep going. But inevitably, at some point, something came back to that the misalignment surfaced in a different way, and then and I didn't learn the lesson, so I did it again. And so it happened a lot. Like more than I want to go into, but as you were saying it, I'm like, oh well, he's just describing what Smoke went through a bunch. And I think that there will be people in our audience who have found this discussion. If you're with us for a reason, and this will resonate with some people because you put it into your terms and whatever it is. It's your role inside a company, your role with a relationship, your dating relationship or your spousal relationship, and how you came to that relationship, and whether you came from a need that was vibrating at a certain level that brought you that relationship, or you came at it from wholeness, and you have a very different experience if two people come to a relationship from wholeness. It's an extraordinary and profound difference, which I am fortunate enough to have experienced. But I've also experienced the other, which is like being incomplete and either finding the opposite or finding what I thought is complete, not even consciously, just energetically, what would create lots of drama and lots of heartache and fun too.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think that there's a lot of different compensations the human being does towards pain. And someone who they call in 12-step recovery, they call workaholism the best dressed addiction, because it's the most aligned with the values of our culture. And so somebody who's working 80 hours a week or grinding and crushing it for however many years, that's put on a pedestal, as opposed to health in their relationships or health in their body and mind and their psyche or inner peace or all these kind of things. But with the achiever consciousness, there's a thrust. And you talk about that thrust, you could not only take you, but an entire company over the cliff and just keep on running and be successful in the eyes of the world. And then what you uncovered in your childhood, it's like, oh, I wasn't just doing this thing, I was running.
Yeah.
I was sprinting away from this horrendous thing. And everybody has their own version of that. And you've went through something, and spoke about it so courageously. And I so honor you for that. And it's one of the things that I really was like, wow, this guy's so different that he's talking about this stuff. And everybody has something they're running from. So it's almost like
everybody has a story.
Everybody has a story. And for me, it's like the contemplation, the degree in which someone has ambition and thrust. If they could just be curious, what is of equal and opposite energy that I might not be recognizing? And if they can take that thrust to be with that thing they're running from, just like in a dream, if somebody's chasing me in a dream, the way that it stops is that I just turn towards it. If I turn towards the shadow with the light of my awareness, it's no longer a shadow. And it's that alchemy of, instead of running away, staying and standing my ground and being with the things I've been running away from, that alchemizes my ego into my soul. And that's way oversimplification. But at the same time, it really is the essence of what this journey is. After that transformation starts to really take place, my eyes change, the veils lift, and all of the gifts that I have suddenly get utilized for a higher purpose that not only helps more people, but gives me the peace in my heart that I was seeking through the thrust of ambition. Because I can make all the money in the world, but if I'm running away from something, I'm never going to find peace in my heart. I'm never going to find true love in my life. And those are the things that matter most on our deathbeds. It's not how many companies that I rate that I start and sell. It's how many people that I love and that loved me. How present was I with the things that were most important in my life? And I like to think of like, can I can I live my life today and die today and be in integrity that I did everything that I wanted to do that was true to my heart? Or was I putting things off because I thought that I had the time? And that's a very simple and age-old way of framing things. But if I'm not living my life today that I want to live, what am I investing in? And what is that going to lead to at the end of my life?
Love that. What came up for me as you were talking about it was, it's back to that earlier conversation around our inner vibration. So our inner knowingness, or that reconciliation of what is that energy I was running away from? How do I alchemize it? How does it become part of me? And in so doing, your vibration changes, get to a higher level, because I say higher level because that's what it is. You can see all the lower levels, you can relate to them, but you're at a different level. And now you can see things that you couldn't see otherwise. And for me, I'll say it firsthand, I was never a guy who wanted to hear about somebody's problem too much. Like I was like, kind of uncomfortable. Like I would listen, but you know, meaty, a problem with their spouse, problem with their kid, a problem with health. I would listen, but I honestly, I was trying to get out of there as fast as I could. Like that was who I was. And I think I've shared a little of this, but now I find not only am I comfortable with it, but people are coming to me out of every which way to talk to me about something that's really, really personal and really difficult and really hard that they are dealing with. And and at first I was like, what the heck is happening? Like, why are they coming to me? And I now know it's because their higher self knows that vibrationally I am okay with it. I can listen, I can be there, I can help them in whatever way it is, whether that's just holding space to listen, or it's something, more where I can ask questions or help them see something that their human self isn't seeing at the current level of development or consciousness they are, that their higher self knows, like, oh, talk to him, he's been through that, you're okay with that guy, somehow, like, that vibrationally is happening. And I think as we think about leading people, leading a family office, leading companies, being in these positions of leadership, if you can get yourself vibrating to where all the other higher selves around you in your organization and in your customer base and all the other investors, whatever, can feel Michael is like, oh, Michael is good. Like, he is the rock of this whole thing, and I can tell him anything. That's where you get to that feedback thing, right? Like where people know they can tell you stuff, and they're comfortable because they know innately at their core that at your core, you're not seeking, you're okay. You're whole. I think that's a really powerful thing for me that, like, I've experienced now, but I think it speaks to what you were just talking about.
Yeah, totally. And I appreciate the higher self frame, and just to fill out kind of the lower half of it, which I think is just another way of coming at the same truth. There is that resonance of a higher self kind of trusting the other person. And I think also from a relational human standpoint, the young boy parts in you that have been hurt or taken advantage of or not accepted, when you've forgiven yourself, forgiven others, created safety inside, then those other parts inside of the human parts and other people are like, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but it's just here, because yes, vibrationally their soul is there, but it's like I find that if I really am coming from a place of fullness and I'm with somebody else, and it can be anywhere, not just in business. If I can see the different parts inside of me that have needs and are needy and overwhelmed and insecure, and I love them and I'm with them, then all of a sudden I can see those parts in everybody.
Mm.
And those parts can see that I'm not struggling in the same way that they are. And that if they come into my field, they're going to be accepted and loved. And for me, what I find a lot of CEOs that I work with, most CEOs, they have a leadership team, and that leadership team runs departments. And those heads of departments report to the CEO, and those heads of departments have teams. And the CEO has one-on-ones with those heads of departments, and those heads of departments have one-on-ones with their teams and so forth. But if the CEO is not at a place where they have really are coming from that fullness, I say, well, what parts are present in your psyche right now that have needs? And who inside of you do you need to have a one-on-one with? Because the
Mm.
one-on-one, and there's a team inside of every person that is a
Right.
fractal of the team outside of them. So if you have problems inside of your culture, lack of trust or inability to be honest and share the truth or inability to execute on goals, where's that lack of integrity happening inside? And if I can shore up that inner team, then I become able to lead an outer team that's healthy rather than pointing at the outer team, oh, they're not executing or they're not sharing their truth or we're not getting to the core of the issue. Where am I not being honest with myself? Where am I not allowing difference and discrepancy inside and powering over it rather than listening to it? All the issues we have on our team are all manifesting inside of ourselves as the leader if we have the humility and the capacity and the willingness to go inside and do that. And I think bringing in that human element sometimes is more amenable to people where spiritual language can kind of turn them off. Because some people are like there, and other people are like, what are you talking about, higher self? But to really bring that, do I feel safe? Yeah, I feel safe. And so it's
Yeah.
both, it's the same thing, but it's just from a different angle.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's that I forget, like family systems, like they use that
Internal
like
family systems,
internal,
yeah.
yeah, like yeah, I met someone that does that. She started describing it. I'm like, oh, you mean this? And she's like, yeah, exactly. I didn't know what it was called until I talked to her, but yeah, it makes sense. Like there's a whole, you got a
Yeah.
whole, you got a whole group, a whole team inside that's coming at it from different angles. I think that's awesome. Open it up and see if there's anything else that you would the topic we haven't gotten into. Obviously, we barely touched the surface of some of these. You're going to get invited back because I think we're going to go deeper on some stuff that we didn't get to today, but that the audience in this dialogue, I think, got a little glimpse of you as well and how you think about things. And you can see like this kind of work is like it can be very uncomfortable idea to like, oh, I'm going to open myself up, I'm going to go into my shadows, and I get that, but it's actually the one kind of work that really matters. I've been in YPO for 21 years. I've done every program you could imagine, every, in an Enneagram to the Colby to the this to that to this. We've had tremendous resources, all kinds of world-class experiences, and all that stuff has been useful. And I think in developing different lines of my development, and none of it really got to the core issues until I got to digging in and putting consciousness into my shadows. And actually, that alchemy process has been much more important than any of it. But I also can't say timing wise because I had to go through all that to get to here. So it's like, it's hard to separate. But this is the hard stuff. And it's also the stuff that will make you the most effective, most compelling, most, thoughtful, able to hold space leader that you could be. And I'm willing to debate anybody on like, is there another method? No, there is no other method. It's the only method is through, not around, not ignoring.
Mm-hmm. And so you would kind of it sounded like at the beginning there was a question of maybe like, is there anything else that I want
Yeah,
to say
yeah,
around this
yeah. I got
journey?
off. I got off on a little bit of a tangent. Is there anything else that you'd like to bring up in this conversation?
Yeah. Well, there's certainly we scratched the surface, but also kind of feel like dropped some depth charges into some holes, and hopefully gave some people some things to really think about. I think for me, the thing that I feel called to end with is being a leader, as you know, is such an incredible responsibility. And what I've learned is that whoever is leading, and it could be like the head of an organization or it could be a head of a team, the influence that they have towards everyone that they lead energetically is massive. Their energy, their conduct, the way that they speak, the way that they execute or don't, the way that they follow through in their word or not, literally creates the ripples that have massive influence on the norms of the culture. And those are explicit norms and implicit norms. And I find that there's this paradox where it's just like all of the issues in the organization or all of the issues of the people that you lead are not your fault. And you have the biggest influence over them coming into coherence with what's consciously desired. And so I think for me, it's really like if I'm a leader, or if a leader is hearing us having this conversation, I would just really encourage you to identify all your problems and to really just stop looking at the tangible, because the tangible that is seen in the outside is the effect. It's the effect of deeper roots. And oftentimes people in leadership positions say, all right, what kind of problem do we have? We got a marketing problem. We got to throw more money at marketing. We have an execution problem. We have a project management problem. We have all this labeling of external problems. But it's really just like, what are my reactions to the problems in my company? What are the emotional reactions? What are the righteous justifications? What are the blames that I have towards the problems that are happening outside? And if I can, as a leader, just pause for a second with being infatuated with the effects on the outside and just ask the question, what is underneath this reaction? What is underneath this righteousness? What is underneath this defensiveness? And it's not about getting an answer. It's just about opening up a dialogue into the realm of causality. And I know everybody who's a leader wants to be more efficient. And you said it really beautifully. This is the fastest pathway in. But how do we enter the door of this pathway? And I think really it is about just pausing and stopping looking at the external things as if they need to be rearranged on a chessboard, and more, what is the causal frequency domino inside of my psyche and field that might be hindering me and us to find solutions to rectify these issues. And if we can get to that level of humility and self-inquiry, I think a lot more intuition and possibility can open up to learn from all those external friction points, as opposed to trying to strong arm them into alignment, but rather see how they're trying to teach, how life is trying to teach us through the issues that we're facing, and coming from a different level of consciousness to come from the solution consciousness rather than the problem consciousness. And I think that's a really powerful, practical pathway into this path that we're speaking about for somebody who may be somewhat new to this.
Agreed. And at the risk of jumping ahead to them for them, what you speak to is that the physical world is a manifestation of the energetic and higher world. And nothing you see is actually caused by the physical world. It's actually a snapshot of what has happened energetically all around it. That may not make sense to everybody, but trust me, this is true. And what you're speaking to is getting to that higher order of causation, which, at the end of the day, as humans, we're never going to know the causation of anything, frankly. But we know that there are contributing factors to things that happen. Like the actual causation is about a gazillion different energetic things interacting that cause whatever we see. Mm-hmm. But as opposed to rearranging the furniture on the Titanic, I'm talking about being the ocean holding the Titanic up. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the underlying thing that actually is what manifests. And doing stuff in the physical world, I take it from firsthand experience, you can do great things, huge things if you have enough energy. But the amount of energy it takes to move the deck chairs just a little bit compared to the underlying energy that the ocean has to move that whole boat just by being the ocean are night and day. And that's what we're talking about.
Absolutely, yeah. It's beautiful.
Two things to wrap. One, Michael, if people want to get a hold of you, we'll put everything in the episode notes and stuff, but is there a website or a way to people to get in touch with you? Obviously through me they can, but how do you prefer?
Yeah, certainly. My website is called candorandcoherence.com. And you can just email me, Michael at candorandcoherence.com, or email my team support at candorandcoherence.com. And you can also set up a meeting with me if you feel interested in doing some work with me. Or there are also ways to get on my newsletter, and there's free resources around kind of coming into this greater coherence as a leader. And by the time this episode airs, I'll probably have a couple other episodes as well on a media page. You can check out a little bit more of that. But really, it's being willing to see that there's a massive competitive advantage, speaking about competition, from taking the time to go inside and make this change. And I think if there's a willingness on this path, I think I still have this quotation on my site that says, the path cannot be taught, it can only be taken. And it's a Zen saying. And it's not about knowing what the path is, but it's about being willing to take the first step. And I think we've given a lot of first steps here on this podcast. And I really honor you for taking the risk to sort of bring some of the esoteric stuff that normally is not talked about forward into this business context. I think it'll provide a lot of value for people.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. And my second thing is I love you have such a great way about you, and it's energetically and just I love that you have a couple of meditations on your personal website that I have done. Would you be willing to kind of close us out with a intentional meditation of your choosing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, obviously, if you're driving, don't do this. But I find the transition from focusing on the outside to the inside for people that especially don't meditate or practice much take a little bit of time. So I'd encourage everyone to just, if you can, close your eyes. And if it feels like it's too much or too fast, just keep your eyes open. And wherever you are right now, you're in this energy of focusing on the outside, in this case, listening to our conversation. So even though your body isn't going to move, see if you can just energetically take like 3 steps backwards to be in a different space. And just taking a few breaths, letting your in-breath be with whatever you're experiencing, whatever thoughts, whatever worries, whatever sensations your body you're having. Breathing in, feeling all that, and then breathing out, just dropping it all down into the earth. Almost like you're breathing in and holding whatever you're feeling. And then as you breathe out, just let it go and let it drop with gravity into the earth. And it's not about getting rid of it. It's just a matter of letting go of it for a moment. It'll be right there again as you breathe in. All the thoughts, all the feelings, all the sensations. And then I know this is a short practice. We'll just do one more thing. Just locate one of those thoughts, one of those feelings, one of those worries, one of those sensations that feels the loudest in your experience right now. And imagine that that thought, feeling, worry, or sensation is an aspect of you, a part of you that you can be in relationship with. And internally, you don't have to say this out loud, but just speak to that thought or that worry, emotion, or sensation and just say, thank you. I see you. And if there's any final thing that you can say to them that validates whatever experiences it is, I see that you're worried. I see that you're distracted. Whatever it is, just name and validate their experience. Practicing befriending and welcoming this aspect of you, not as a problem, but as an asset to the wisdom that life is trying to show you in this moment. And then just take a slow, deep breath. And when you're ready, opening your eyes and coming back into this space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll see you again soon, my
That
friend.
sounds good, brother.
Cheers.